It's a real joy to be here. I cannot imagine scheduling a trip to America and not coming here. It's really interesting that Pastor Nick mentioned about Holocaust denial, because that's only one small piece of what goes on a daily basis. The state of Israel is 3,000 years old, 75 years young this year. But there is not a day that goes by where some country, some governmental body, let alone individuals, are rejecting the legitimacy of our right to exist. We were closed for 2 years, totally closed to visitors. So I only began working again at the very end of March. And groups coming back have been few and far between. Actually, my business of this past year was all 2020 and 2021 groups and individuals. So I had no business of 2022. Now we're hoping and praying for the 2023 business. But in recognizing that there is a tremendous lack of knowledge, even amongst those who love and support Israel, I thought I'd be in the perfect position to help out. Licensed by the government of Israel to teach about Israel at a time where you gotta wonder what people let get in their heads. I'll give you a few examples. May I? Bless your hearts. Who has here been in Israel and been on the boat ride on the Kinneret, the Sea of Galilee? Yeah. Okay. How do you think I felt when someone turned to me and said, looks around and said, "Are we in international waters?" Where every bit of land around you is part of the state of Israel. Right after our elections, November 1st. By the way, you know, some of you have your favorite experiences in Israel. For some, it's the Kinneret. For some, it's floating in the Dead Sea. For some, it's falafel. I get it. But what we really do best are elections. I've been an Israeli for 13 years. We have had 8 national elections. And you're wondering, how is it that they can actually count the votes, which seems to be a challenge in some states of the United States? Well, we do it old school style. There's a partition. I go behind the partition. There are these little squares with the symbol of each party. There are usually 26 running in an election. You take it, you put it in an envelope, you seal it up. Then you walk to the front, and again, they register your name, and you put it in a box. Wow. In any case, shortly after our elections, I'm guiding a family. The guy said to me, "I've heard that as soon as Netanyahu is officially prime minister, he will be setting up an altar on the Temple Mount to resume sacrifices." Anyone remember the group Jefferson Airplane? One pill makes you larger and one pill makes you... Are you kidding me? Netanyahu personally is not a religious man at all. He utilizes religious parties to remain in power, which he's done for an incredibly long period of time. He's a politician. But people, and then people send me websites from various teachers, quotes in italics, throughout the United States. Well, this one said, seriously? Y'all, the guy hasn't been in Israel in 10 years. I don't think he knows an Israeli personally. and he's telling us what's happening. It's like when someone used to say, well, in Israel, they have, mandatory vaccinations. No, we never did. But people like to talk about it. So, I can spew a lot of information, but first I want to frame it that everything needs to be viewed in context. Very important when you're studying the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, just as important when you're studying the history of Israel. Let me give you an example. When I was here in the summer, there were 2 locations that I visited, dear friends, where the issue came up. Now understand something, many of you know me, but I see a lot of fresh faces. Strap on your seatbelts and place your tray tables in their upright and locked position. This may get to be a bumpy ride. I grew up in the Bronx in New York City. Yo, now you can't leave, okay? Understand that. The Bronx. Yo. Okay. So explain to me why someone would be so shocked to find out that I have never mowed a lawn. I mean, gobsmacked, shocked. One, a dear friend in Texas, been a friend of mine for over 20 years. Just can't get over that. Hanoch, and you explain nicely. The Bronx, concrete, subways. My parents were poor. By the way, for those of you who are saying, wait a second, I thought Jewish people were really good at making money. Not every stereotype is true, kids. So this friend in Texas, to this day, he's a brilliant man, but he just cannot absorb the concept that I did not grow up like him in East Texas. But it was when I was in Louisiana where the father-in-law of the pastor could not, he not only in our conversation when he said, so you've never mowed a lawn? I said, no, I never have. My parents didn't own a flower box on the fire escape. No, we had nothing. Couldn't believe it. So then he comes into the kitchen area. There are about 8 or 10 people. And he said, hey, y'all, did you hear this? Hanoch never mowed a lawn for his parents. As politely as I could, I said, please remember, I grew up in one of the most inner city urban environments in the entire United States of America. Okay? However, in our really deficient school system, we were aware that there were kids growing up that had animals and lawns. We knew that there were kids that grew up on ranches and had horses. Why is it that you guys just don't understand? And that's a part, as a tour guide, where I struggle with not understanding what someone doesn't understand. So we're going to clear this all up today. Actually, I'm going to touch upon a lot of areas, surprisingly, using maps, which no one knows how to read anymore, because the maps don't talk. At the roundabout, take a right. No, you're looking at a map, AAA maps. What is this? Different thing. It's called How Did We Get There? And how do we get here? Excuse me. And it's going to be a review, a kind of quick, brief survey of history, bringing up some points to the very day that we're in now, understanding why Israel is where it is, what our borders are and why, and what our challenges are. I know that sounds incredibly boring, but you know me. We'll make it fun. The next slide, please. Okay, so here we are, a general map of Israel. By the way, I apologize for the shading where it says West Bank. There is a West Bank. It's not in our country. It's in yours. That's Oregon, Washington, Northern California. That's the West Bank. You think I'm kidding? I will explain a little more as we move on. But here, you'll notice, so there's shading. Judea and Samaria. I know we have a lot of Hayovel fans and workers here. Baruch Hashem. That's wonderful. 10 out of 9 congregations that I speak at, I state that statistic very carefully, 10 out of every 9 has never heard of Hayovel. Here we have a constant flow of workers for Hayovel, which is amazing, let alone our amazing Beit Tehila tour. And we're going to talk about that. But you'll notice, okay, so basically, what you may have heard regarding topography and the history of Israel is from the ancient times. Why was Israel such a sought-after place? Sought after. I'm sorry, my accent. Sought after. Yeah, okay. Apologies. Okay, there were 3 ways that you could get from the area of Egypt to either Rome or in the other direction, Assyria, Babylonia, etc. Okay, 3 ways. 1, you come down the center of our country. You don't see it on this map, but it's a mountain range. Okay, it's not like mountains in America. We're a tiny country, we have tiny mountains. Okay, mountain range. That's called Derech Ha'avot, the way of the patriarchs, our fathers. Actually, our mothers too. Right, the center of the country, middle range. The waterside, Derech Hayam, the way of the sea. Interestingly enough, they weren't expert at navigation yet, so what did they do? They hugged the coast all the way up. Or on the Jordanian side, you see where it says Dead Sea? And then there's that line, that's the Jordan River, the mighty Jordan River, which is a pitiful trickle today. But hey, once upon a time it was. You've got a series of mountains. You also don't see it here. Everything east in Jordan is desert. Okay, so that's biblical topography. That's called Derech HaMelech, the way of the king. Incredibly boring. Let's go to the next slide, please. That's the map you all want to see. That's the one we talk about all the time. Those are the biblically promised borders. The problem is you need to be a little more sophisticated and educated in the world that we live in today. Because y'all can be in Walmart somewhere and someone talks about, whoa, you know, Israel's occupying Palestine and when, and you say, well, you pull up that map, it doesn't help. It doesn't make a point. And if you say, well, God gave the land to the Jews, you're correct. But it doesn't win you any points in a debate because it doesn't explain anything. Next slide, please. We'll come back to this one later. Okay, here you see a little more of the topography. You see a little of the mountain range. You see a little bit of the desert. That's what everyone thinks. By the way, I was guiding a group a few months ago, early December. This woman is FaceTiming with her sons in America. And they're astounded because behind her are all these cars. So Israel has cars? There's a restaurant that I was having a salad in DeRidder, Louisiana, a year ago. And my friends were saying, this is our friend from Israel. I said, get out of here. You're from Israel? I said, yeah. I said, you've heard of Israel? I said, a little. I said, can you show me something to prove that you're from Israel? So I said, you know what? Now that, kippah doesn't prove I'm from Israel, so I take out my wallet and I show her my Israeli driver's license. I said, you have cars in your country? It's a little scary. Next slide, please. Let's ramp up here. Okay, here we've got, that's the Davidic kingdom. Myth number 1, we're going to blow it away. There are people that believe that the kingdom of King David, David HaMelech, and Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, were the biblically promised borders. And you see, it is not. It does go off a lot into the right, kind of. Now, you'll notice to the left of that upper section, it's all white. Who is living there? I'll give you a hint. It's currently a country called Lebanon. The Phoenicians, allies of King David, Hiram. By the way, King David, King Solomon, the glory days. How many years together did they reign? 80. That's it. 80 glorious years. And then the kingdom split, northern kingdom of Israel, boo, hiss. So number one, we've never been in the full biblically promised borders. Number one. Next slide, please. Okay. This is interesting. This shows Second Temple period, the time of King Herod. So the first thing you'll notice is that the Negev's not there. Now, what we refer to as the Herodian period starts in 37 before the Common Era. That's when Herod the Great began to reign. And it ends in 73. The fall of Mitzada, the fall of Masada, the Great Revolt, it's over. Don't worry, it gets more exciting as we go along. Next slide, please. Okay, I love this. You're saying, like, why? I'm getting there. Jews in the land of Israel, 73 to 636 Common Era. How's that even possible? Wait a second. Most people are thinking, wait, the temple was destroyed, the Jews were all sent off into exile, and the rest is history. That's absolutely, unequivocally not correct. Remember, 62 years after the Great Revolt was the Bar Kokhba rebellion. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. According to the Roman historian Cassius Dio, or Dio Cassius, more than 900,000 Jews were killed. Much more than in the Great Revolt. So in the Great Revolt, when the temple was destroyed, Jerusalem and Judea around it were depopulated. Jerusalem remained depopulated of Jews. But there was huge Jewish settlement in the land of Israel. I can prove it to you. The codification of the Mishnah, our oral law, Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, occurred several hundred years after the temple was destroyed. The Talmud Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud, which is the commentary on the Mishnah, among other things, also hundreds of years later. What? 636, what happened? Now we actually have to move back a little bit. Here's a date every Christian should know. 322. Constantine accepts Christianity as the religion of the Roman Empire. The Romans, in history, morph into what's now called the Byzantine Christians. They rule in the land of Israel. 636. Actually, we can go back a few years. 622. Islam is created. Islam's only been around for 1,400 years. Muhammad. So, Muhammad dies. Muslims from Saudi Arabia come across and defeat the Byzantine Christians and take over the land of Israel. They're the Umayyads. That starts a series of Muslim regimes controlling the land of Israel, all foreign Muslims. There were no indigenous Arabs in the land of Israel, ever. So you had the Umayyads, the Ayyubids, the Abbasids. You had the Mamluks. They're either from Baghdad, what today is Iraq, Egypt, or Syria. Now you have to remember that, because the average person in the street, if you ask them what's going on between Israel and Palestine, will tell you there's a country called Palestine, and in 1967, Israel rolled in the tanks and the planes and conquered it, and have been occupying it ever since. You must be in the Twilight Zone. Next slide, please. This is even more fun. This is centers of Jewish life in the land of Israel between 636 and 1880. The land of Israel has always had a Jewish population. In all the eras, the four holy cities, Jerusalem, Hebron, Tzfat, Safed, and Tiberias. Kind of shocking. That's the era when Mark Twain went to Israel and wrote a book called Innocents Abroad. And he said the place was not heavily populated. There's hardly anyone around here. But Jews remained. The majority of the Jewish population at that time was living around the world. Not yet in Miami Beach. I had reason in the summer when I was here to go to Miami. And I have to tell you, I saw a lot of people who no way on earth were Jewish. I also didn't see Crockett or Tubbs. I didn't see any women with really big hair, fancy cars. And I have to tell you, if you've flown into the Miami airport, it looks a lot like LaGuardia Airport in New York City has looked for, by the way, not anymore. It's a fancy pants LaGuardia is. Miami? Okay, next slide, please. We're building up. Okay, Jews in the land of Israel, 1880 to 1914. Understand, there is a very popular misconception in the Hebrew roots Messianic world that the Shoah, the Holocaust, had to occur for the state of Israel to be reborn. Let me share with you what my teacher of blessed memory, Rav Meir Kahana, had taught us. The Shoah, the Holocaust, occurred because there was no state of Israel. And the British Army, who had been occupying our country between 1917 and 1948, blocked the shores. Any Jews that could get out from Europe could not get into the land of Israel. There were successive waves of Jews, not just from Europe, but also from the Muslim world, the Arab countries, that had continually been going to Israel. Israel was never a country empty of Jews. And Jerusalem has never served as the capital of any nation ever except ours. Next slide, please. Ooh, now we get into colors. Here's a little background. I don't know if any of y'all have ever heard of the Sykes-Picot Agreement. This was an agreement in 1916 in the middle of the First World War where England and France make an agreement of what they're going to do with the Middle East when they win the war. The blue area is all going to be under British influence. The red area and the pink area is all going to be under French influence. And the rest they're going to decide. But understand, there was never a plan for an independent state. They were not thinking of the state of recreating the state of Israel at the time. And since Palestinians had never been invented until 1964, no one thought of a country for them either. Interesting. But is a little thing in the back of your head that should say, that's barely 100 years ago. 100 years ago, no one was talking about an Arab state in our country. Because shortly afterwards, you had the Balfour Declaration, where Israel was given a mandate by the League of Nations, the predecessor of the United Nations, to create a Jewish homeland in the geographical area that they referred to as Palestine. There never was a country called Palestine, an independent country. There was a geographic area, like you have the Everglades, Like in Louisiana, you have the bayou. It was an area referred to, it was called Palestine. Where did the name come from? It came from the Romans. In attempting to crush the Jewish people, at the time of the Bar Kokhba rebellion, they renamed things. Judea became Palestina. And they had a Palestina Prima, a Palestina Secunda, a Palestina Tertia. There were different regions. Jerusalem was called Aelia Capitolina. Shechem, where Yosef is buried, Joseph, was called Napulus, after the city of Naples. But you're saying, wait a second, it's not called Napulus now, it's called Nablus. Yeah, because the Arabs, in their language, cannot pronounce a P. They make it a B. So in a country that they claim is theirs, they can't even properly pronounce the name of the city. Just a coincidence. Next slide, please. Okay. That, blue and red, constitute the mandate for Palestine. That was supposed to be the future Jewish home until 1922. When a guy in the British government, the Undersecretary for the Navy, a guy by the name of Winston Churchill, 1922, with, as he put it, the stroke of a pen, created the Hashemite kingdom of Transjordan, what we know today of Jordan. That whole red area, 2/3 of the Palestinian mandate. The mandate for Palestine. That's supposed to be the Jewish state. Remember, we had 2.5 tribes living on the east bank of the Jordan. So easily people forget. Next slide, please. Okay. The Peel Commission. This is another plan that the British had because the British wanted to get out of Israel. They were not enjoying the mandate. By the way, for those of you who've been to Israel, particularly Jerusalem, and noticed a lot of cats, the British are responsible. We had a rat problem, rat and mice, during the British mandate. British government decided they were going to bring in cats from Europe to get rid of the rats and mice. And it worked. It's brilliant. It's now the late 1930s. They're looking around. They're saying, we've got a cat problem. The British decide in their eternal wisdom that what they were going to do is bring in dogs from Europe. Second World War broke out. And after the British wanted to leave, but otherwise you'd be seeing stray dogs in the corridor and not cats. Thank you, Hanoch, for telling us that tidbit of information that I've stayed up late at night wondering about. Okay, so here they're going to have a Jewish state and they're going to have an Arab state. Now the Jewish state is largely the Negev. Everybody's decided. Now, the thing that's interesting is it was to be a Jewish state and an Arab state. Arab. Not Palestinian. They hadn't been invented yet. Next slide, please. Okay, so here we are. The UN Partition Plan, November 29th, 1947. The United States. The United Nations votes to partition the land of Israel into 2 countries. So they've cut off already Jordan, and they're cutting off even more. Jewish community is not happy about it, but they're thrilled that there's international recognition they'll have a state. We have now 600,000 Jews, 1948, 600,000 Jews in the land. The Arabs reject it. And they and 7 Arab nations go to war immediately to drive us into the sea. 1948, you have Jewish refugees from the Shoah, the Holocaust, arriving. And because the British are no longer in control, they're allowed into the country. Jews being expelled from Arab nations, being absorbed into the country. We now have 650,000 Jews. However, the United States, in the infinite wisdom of its government, decided that they were going to embargo any weapon sales to the new state of Israel. Between 1948 and 1967, we were unable to buy, not only couldn't buy American planes, couldn't buy tanks, artillery pieces, we couldn't buy a single bullet. That comes up again a little later as we draw through 1967. So war breaks out. Next slide, please. The armistice lines, 1949. It stays that way until 1967. The blue area is Israel. The gray area against the water is a place called Gaza. Gaza, which used to be an ancient Jewish city and Jewish communities around the area. But in the middle, you see Jerusalem, which is divided. You can't tell here. South of Jerusalem is Judea, Yehuda. North is Shomron, Samaria. By the way, I've taken groups to Masada, and then to Ein Gedi, and then to the Dead Sea, and have people ask, are we driving through Palestine? And you know, it doesn't even dawn on me. If you were driving through another country, you'd have to show a passport. You get on a flight in Tampa and fly to Havana. You've got to show a passport. People don't know. It stays this way until 1967. State of Israel is now 3 million Jews, 1967. 1.5 million Jews were expelled from Arab countries with barely the clothes on their back. There was a series of pogroms, attacks on Jewish communities, but they came to Israel. Next slide, please. This is great. You see all those black dots? Those are all Jewish communities destroyed in the War of Independence. We absorbed each and every one of those refugees. See, there were communities in Gaza, Gush Etzion, all the way up into the southern part of Shomron, Samaria. Next slide, please. June 1967, we all remember the Six-Day War. We've all heard of the Six-Day War. Some of us actually remember it. Amazing, 6 days. Israel defeats Egypt, Syria, and Jordan. Changed the borders, changed history, that one war. But this is the map leading up to the war. Let's talk about May 1967, not June 67. Understand something. There was a war in 1956 against Egypt. Israel liberates the entire Sinai Peninsula, that whole big area. Under American pressure, under President Eisenhower, we were forced to relinquish that territory. Now, the reason we had gone to war is all the way south of Eilat, this place called the Straits of Tiran. All of Israel's shipping would go through there. In one of the most amazing turns of history, that was crucial because we got all of our oil from a country called Iran. The Shah of Iran was an ally of Israel. Of course, since he was deposed, things have changed a lot with Iran. But understand, so the Sinai had UN peacekeeping forces in it. The Americans promised if Israeli shipping was ever blockaded again, they would be the first to go through with their ships and break the blockade. May 1967, we go to the American government. Yo, what's up? We're blockaded. Americans said, sorry, we're busy with Vietnam. America was just getting started, really, 67. Things are really bad. There are UN peacekeeping forces in the Sinai. They're ordered out. Egyptian tanks and troops go right up to our border. The Jordanians mobilize. The Syrians mobilize. There are units of the Iraqi army that are sent forward into Syria. The noose was tightening. We were expecting the worst. In the public parks in Tel Aviv and Haifa, they began digging out mass graves for all the tens of thousands of casualties we expected. People were fleeing Israel. There was a joke in that era, the last one, it wasn't called Ben Gurion Airport at the time, it was called Lud, L-O-D. The last one out at Lud turned off the lights. It was really grim. We went to war. We launched a preemptive strike that essentially destroyed the Egyptian and Syrian air forces on the ground. America was very, very, very angry at us. Tough darts, buddy. Jordan, getting disinformation from Nasser in Egypt, enters the war, which enabled us, Baruch Hashem, thank God, to liberate the old city of Jerusalem, all of Judea, all of Samaria. We got the Golan Heights, we got Gaza, we got Sinai. All right, we messed up the last two, admittedly. Next slide, please. This is what Israel looked like after June 1967. It was then that the government of Israel decided not to incorporate all of those territories into Israel. Technically, Judea and Samaria, where 500,000 Jews live, is not technically part of Israel. So all of you guys who have big pictures of Benjamin Netanyahu in your living room, he's the greatest guy. He hasn't done squat for the communities in Judea and Samaria. And many of you are so close to people you've met there. You volunteered Hayovel. I mean, I got to tell you, the last time when our group, Beit Tehila, was at Hayovel just a few months ago. What was that, June? June. Tommy Waller. And if you don't know Tommy, you should get to know him. He's the visionary that created Hayovel, this idea that Christian volunteers would go to Israel, Shomron, Samaria, pay their own money to do this, not paid workers, to reestablish the vineyards that were promised by the prophet Yeshayahu, Isaiah. But Tommy said something to our group, and I'll never forget this. He looks at the Beit Tehila group that's there, and he said, to us Christians, prophecy is something we wait for. We watch for it to happen. He points out the window to the community of Har Bracha, the Mount of Blessing, and he said, the Jews, they do prophecy. Every single element that I have showed you about Jewish communities throughout the ages were done with sacrifice. Okay, so this is post-1967. Israel is under the, foolish impression that since we beat the Arabs so soundly, they would now want to negotiate peace. Stupid is as stupid does. Monday night, when we speak about the Har HaBayit, the Temple Mount, you'll see how this came into play and haunts us to this very day. Okay, Sadat, Anwar Sadat of Egypt, comes to, big thing, Menachem Begin is prime minister, 1977. Shortly afterwards, you've got Sadat coming, we negotiate and we surrender Sinai, the Abu Rodes oil fields that we had there, all of our training bases for our Air Force, everything. Yes, we have a peace agreement with Egypt. It's referred to, by the way, as a cold peace. Israelis flock to Egypt. No Egyptians come to Israel to visit. But there is an agreement. Next slide, please. This is where it really gets interesting. 1993, the Oslo Accords. The Oslo Accords create 3 areas in Judea and Samaria. Area A, under total Palestinian Authority control. We, and please don't tell me Jews are so smart, we prop up something called the Palestinian Authority, a corrupt organization of terrorists and terrorist supporters. Mahmoud Abbas was elected to a 4-year term as their president. He's been there for 17 years. Okay, Area A, total Palestinian civil and security control. And the Palestinian Authority security forces are all funded and trained and equipped by the American government. I just thought you'd want to know. Area B, that's Palestinian Authority civil control, Israeli security. Area C, total Israeli control, security, and civil. Understand, that's not actually in effect any longer. We regularly operate in Jenin and other areas in Area A to stop terrorism because the so-called Palestinian Authority is doing nothing. But I want you to look at that, and you see the black names. Those are major Jewish communities. It is like taking a patchwork quilt, superimposing Swiss cheese on it, and saying, ta-da, we've got a map. That is what's referred to by the American government as the two-state solution. The American government, along with the European Union, United Nations, is pushing for that whole area to become something called Palestine. That would mean that the 500,000 Jews that live there would have to leave. That would mean, if you look where it says Mediterranean Sea, that area over there, we'll show a little later on another map, is 9 miles wide. And understand something, 9 miles isn't any bigger in our country than it is in yours. That's a really small space. Next slide, please. Gives you a little better look. It really looks like a rash. I apologize that that map says Palestine, but it was the best illustration that I could find, and my media guy wasn't able to white it out. So you're referring to Judea and Samaria? Now, the gray area is Area C. Then you've got B, which is the brown, and A, which is the dark blue. Go make a state out of that. It really is like, it's like scrambled eggs with rabies. It's really bad. And people still talk about that. I don't use the term two-state solution. I describe it as the two-state delusion. Because, but it gets more complicated. Why? Gaza, we surrendered Gaza in 2005, the disengagement, the hitnatkut, as we call it in Hebrew. We unilaterally gave control of Gaza to the Palestinian Authority. They could have had a Palestinian state on the Mediterranean. Instead, they got defeated by Hamas and kicked out. And since 2005, close to 30,000 rockets and missiles have been fired at Israel from the area of Gaza. That's why we're a little reticent of saying, hey, take some of our homeland and build your country there. Ain't gonna work. Next slide. Please. Okay. Here, that's showing a little bit of depths, and trust me, we're small. We're the size of the state of New Jersey. By the way, population currently in Israel, over 9 million, over 7 million Jews. Now, I'm pushing through this quickly because I want to get to a little bit of explanation of reactions to our recent elections and why the American government, why their heads are exploding, and Biden is sending Jake Sullivan to Israel soon. You guys know who Jake Sullivan is. He's the national security advisor of your country. You should know the name. Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin. I'm an Israeli, I should know this stuff. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. This is where I really ruffle your feathers. And I'm sorry, not sorry. Remember when Donald Trump was president? He had a plan, the deal of the century. He was going to create a Palestinian state. Y'all realize that? He said it. He said it openly. Those green areas were going to be the Palestinian state, including Gaza. And you see there's a line there? He wanted to build a tunnel from Judea to Gaza. We already have enough trouble with tunnels. Seriously. I mean, it's unbelievable. And he was going to give areas, not his to give, areas along the Negev border. Now understand something. Where does the term West Bank come from? Jordan. Jordan is on the east bank of the Jordan River. When Jordan conquered that area and held it for 19 years, 1948, 1967, they never annexed it. It wasn't their country. They knew it. But they referred to it as the West Bank. They're on the East Bank. That's the West Bank. But the world has seized onto that term, West Bank. And that's why I always use the term referring to America's Pacific Northwest as the West Bank, because it's ludicrous. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's the map of Israel we're familiar seeing. What's going on? But before we get to that, let's go to the next one. Okay. So here we know that that's eventually what's going to be. So people say to me, what can we do to support that happening? Because again, remember, as they say to me, they throw back my words. They say, you Jews do prophecy, so tell us what we should do. The biggest challenge right now is in Yehuda v'Shamron, Judea and Samaria. That and the Har HaBayit, the Temple Mount, which we're going to talk about on Monday. So, here's my dilemma in sharing this stuff with you now. I don't know of another congregation. This is my 27th trip to America since August 2013. Of course, there was the 2-year hiatus where I got to watch YouTube sitting at home, called COVID. I am not familiar with another congregation that has had this many people go to Israel. I am not familiar with another congregation that has this many per capita volunteers for Hayovel. I do not know of another congregation that every 18 months or so has a regular tour to Israel. Doesn't exist. So A, you need to keep doing what you're doing. Which leads me into, we need you. You need you to come to Israel. You know, I know it's not cheap, but for years, every time I'm in the United States speaking to groups, I constantly tell people to start an Israel fund. Even if it's $5 a day, even if you're waiting for your tax refund from the IRS, whatever it is, if you fail to plan, you are planning to fail. There is, when people say to me, well, I had trouble this year, or I had trouble last year, I had trouble the year before financially. I understand that. Believe me, I didn't work for 2 years. got no aid from the government. I have no idea to this day how I still pay for food. It's called credit cards. You pay for it eventually. First of all, think of it this way. You have no excuse to not have an Israel fund. No excuse on earth why each and every person here, including teenagers, shouldn't be saving some money for a future trip to Israel. That's number one. Number two, Pastor Tikva is going to stand up here over the next number of weeks and continue to share information about Israel. How many of you are ready to step forward? I'm not talking about the volunteers going to Hayovel. They've got an excuse. What about the rest of y'all? What about, in your efforts to grow this congregation, how many of you reach out to friends, colleagues, and neighbors and invite them to an event here at Beit Tehila? I know there's an ongoing, membership class for new people. Bring them in. Most people in this world today are looking for family. They're looking for community. They're looking to belong. Reach out and invite them along on the Israel trip. Many people, I meet people all the time who tell me, I want to go to Israel, but I don't know where to fit in. Where do I find a tour to join? I have a tour that I do with Mike Lane, but you guys have one right here. I realize, by the way, there's not going to be a test this evening on all those dates and the numbers and who came when and where. This is a very brief exposure to show you that the framework that supposedly exists for an independent Arab state in our country isn't real. Isn't real. History doesn't match up with it. But now is the time. I know many of you, if not most, give money regularly to organizations in Israel, particularly organizations that are involved in Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria. But you now need to multiply those efforts. What do I mean? What I said before about getting others involved. Getting others involved. There are people in your communities who care about Israel, who are looking for a community like this. They may not even realize how much they're looking for a community like this. It's up to you to invite them in. It's up to you to extend that hand of friendship and welcome. We're living at a time where the world is getting exceedingly complex. When I go around here in the U.S. and I'm asking people, who do you think will get the Democratic or Republican nominations for president the next time you guys have an election, I get a lot of blank looks. The American government is in deep trouble. Very, very deep trouble. You, as individuals, are not going to be able to affect that. However, you as a community can make a huge difference. This is the time to kind of pull in the belt, to get up there, to get together. Because, it's interesting. We in Israel very often have the feeling that we're standing out there alone, like we're flapping in the breeze. And we particularly find that when people from the alleged American Jewish community get up and criticize us. People were criticizing our government before it was formed. Understand something. This is a legitimately elected democratic government. I have never voted for Likud. The person I wanted, the party I wanted, didn't even get into this Knesset. This is not, the Americans call it an extreme right-wing government. Get a dictionary and look up the words. Them, not you. Extreme right-wing government. That's, in our governments in Israel are either called right-wing or left-wing. In the way in America you delegitimize someone by calling them a liberal or an ultra-conservative. Don't believe it. The ultra-Orthodox parties in our government are not right-wing. They have never done anything right-wing. They have never supported communities in Judea and Samaria. Do you know that? The ultra-Orthodox? Never. Oops. Here is the time. The clock is ticking. This is when we collectively stand up together. You know, what's interesting. I have less speaking engagements this trip than any of my other trips to America, all the other 26. People aren't that interested in hearing about Israel. They're not. If I come and I praise them, I've done that occasionally, very rarely, and tell them that they're doing a great job, they love that. When I challenge their beliefs about Israel, and again, I'm not talking about theology here, because I'm all about mutual respect. This is the time we need to educate ourselves. This is the time we need to step forward. I'm waiting for Pastor Tikva to contact me and say, okay, we've just had to close out registration because we've got a full bus. So I don't know where to put people. I'm waiting for that to happen. You can't wait for that to happen. Understand something. Here at Beit Tehila, my fear is that there are those among you who take this congregation for granted. Particularly if you've never gone to another congregation. You think like this is just the way it is. I'm sitting there in Israel watching Pastor Nick teach about when Judah approaches Joseph. That was a great use of my time, I got to tell you. I enjoyed it, and I was shocked at the end. I had no idea that the musical talent in the family didn't just come from Pastor Danielle. It came from, Pastor Nick got on, put on a guitar, and I'm like, oh, this is going to get ugly really quick. And no, it was wonderful. This is a congregation that always speaks about the restoration of all of Israel, that always speaks about reconciliation, that has the most open door policy of crazy fanatics from Israel that I've ever seen. The only missing factor is we need more people. More of the right people. More of the people who care. More of the people who want to stand with you and serve their communities. The upcoming Israel tour is a great example, but it's only one of several. And I think it's fabulous that there's a group of guys going for the, I guess it's the pruning now? Yet remember, I've never mowed a lawn, so I don't know. I really asked some people recently that, I remember this whole issue of mowing the lawn came up in August, but no one's mentioned it so far. Hanoch, it's the winter in America. Like, yeah? Yeah, it doesn't grow. Yeah, okay, I found that out. Thank you. Okay. I have the time hasn't moved from 0.03 seconds, so I have no idea of how much time I have. All right, don't get nervous back there. I've got 7 minutes or 7 hours? Okay, 7 minutes. Tick, 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 tick. So we have time for a quick question or two. Well, like I said, we've got nothing else to say. That's not true. Anybody? Yes. What are you going to write a book about all the politics in town? That's really sweet of you to say that. I don't know if anyone would read it. Yeah? Okay, now I have a new project. Now I just need COVID again for 2 years and I'll write it. No. Thank you. To me, I've always been an amateur historian. So to me, this is fascinating. And also like to prove that when people say, well, there was a Palestine, there was a country. No, there wasn't. Ever. All right, now I have a new project. Anything else? This light is blinding me, Pastor Russell. Do you think you could do something different on Monday night? Crawl on the floor? Is that what you said? Oh, I could, okay, I can speak from the floor. Okay. So just a quick thought. I don't like our prime minister. However, he is our democratically elected prime minister. For the American government to say that Israel doing something or not doing something is unacceptable is absurd. It's condescending. We just had a minister from the British government on the Temple Mount. Of course, we're going to talk about the Temple Mount extensively on Monday, whole different presentation, who said that, they are in favor of the Jordanian custodial role that Jordan has always had. No, it's not always. It's 1948. They were the stronger army, the Jordanian Arab Legion, armed and trained by the British and equipped. I could pick on the British. I don't have to pick on the American government. It's not any of your business. It's not their business. It's our country. And that's the thing that bothers them the most, that we have a government that has ministers, not talking about the prime minister, has ministers that say, I'm going up on the Temple Mount. And all he did, Itamar Ben-Gvir, all he did for 13 minutes was walk on the Temple Mount. Because Netanyahu, back in 2015, 2016, registered. I've got less than 5 minutes. Netanyahu said that on the Temple Mount, Muslims pray, Jews and Christians can visit. That's Netanyahu. So you all have to take down your pictures when you get home. Come on, Bibi, into the trash bin. So Itamar Ben-Gvir went up for 13 minutes and the world is losing their mind because Hamas in Gaza is threatening us. We are a proud people. We are not American Jews. So understand something. The American Jews, in most cases, more than 80%, are 4 generations away from any kind of religious connection and observance. Many of you, for whatever reason, think that when you meet a secular Jew here in your community, that they must have somehow had a Torah education and gave it up. They have no clue. They probably think you're more religious than anyone they've ever met. Understand, this now is our time. Our time. This is the time when the people of Israel stand up and we say, no more. Because Hashem is looking down at all of us. And he's using a term from a movie. See, that's the way Hashem communicates with me, with lyrics and one-liners. He said, Hanoch, tell them I'm wondering, is you is or is you ain't my constituency? This is a congregation that identifies openly with love and support of the Jewish people in the state of Israel. That's why I know that this congregation is always going to be going somewhere. Think of it this way. Labriut, God bless you. You're part of it. Let's grow the team. Let's make the playoffs. Let's go all the way this year. Thank you.